Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Winning in Edmonton podcast. We're a show that celebrates local business and entrepreneurship. So, we're going to interview the top business people in Edmonton, find out exactly what they did to become successful, learn from their experiences, their successes, their challenges, and incorporate those powerful lessons into our own lives and businesses. So I'm your host, Francisco Martin, and this is the first kickoff episode. I'm super excited with the guest that we have here today. His name is Jeff Tetz, who is the CEO of Results here in Edmonton, which is a business consulting firm that's worked with all sorts of different organizations, from small businesses to large corporations. He's also the host of the Unleashed podcast. So super fired up to have you here, Jeff. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for hosting me. And I'm stoked to just have a conversation with you here today. And I love what you're doing. And I have a big appreciation for people that put themselves out there and take risks and are trying to make an impact. And so, just great to be here with you.
You know, it's when you look online, there's so many different podcasts, but when you're out there and actually talking to people, there's very few people that are actually, doing it. So definitely excited to get this thing going. And I think maybe just as a good starting point, it'd be awesome to just hear a little bit about yourself, what your role is, a little bit about your business and what you do there at Results.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the CEO of a company called Results, as you mentioned. And our role is primarily helping local mid-sized companies create a leadership team that can do a better job at focusing on the key strategic drivers of their business and executing better. And there's a lot of different ways that we do it, but ultimately we help leadership teams function at a higher level, be more accountable to each other, be more focused on the key priorities instead of distracted. And we help them build a culture where employees have a lot of joy and satisfaction coming to work every day and being clear about the role they play and just being really enthusiastic about trying to achieve big things together. And so ultimately that's what we help organizations achieve.
Amazing. So in preparation for this, Jeff, I was on your LinkedIn and you've had a very interesting career. You've done lots of different things. You were with the Oilers Entertainment Group. I saw you were in the football with the NFL. I would love to start from the very beginning and just hear the story of how you got started as a business consultant and how you got into the role that you are today. So how do you go from Oilers Entertainment Group account manager to now you're in the business consulting world?
Yeah, so I think a lot of luck and a lot of help and a lot of sort of following things that made me curious and intuition and looking for opportunities that were both exciting and scary. And my upbringing was very much, I was a person that had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And so I think I've always envied folks that from a very sort of young age, they knew they wanted to be an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, a dentist or what have you. But that wasn't me. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And so I went to university right out of high school, and glad that I did it. But I just kind of took a business path with a major in marketing at MacEwan University, and then transferred to U of A. But still had no clue what I wanted to do with my life. And I think what I recognized eventually was that I was always good at convincing groups of people through my enthusiasm about a certain subject or topic to do something different than what they were doing. And so I think I recognized I was good at sales. And because of that, I actually started a shuttle bus business out of Fort Saskatchewan. I would organize a shuttle bus from Fort Saskatchewan to Edmonton Elks games and back. And I had a reasonable amount of success with that, to the point that the Edmonton Elks offered me a job in the summer of 1999.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, being so curious that why would a company like the Edmonton Elks, who've been around for 50 or 60 years, need a sales department when everybody knows about them? That's how naive I was to what a sales profession actually was. And in my very first month on the job, I was the top producing salesperson, despite being very bad at it. But as soon as I recognized I could be good at something, even though I wasn't very refined or skilled at it, that really then got the bug to learn and grow. And so when I was working in sports on the sales side, I was also trying to be a hockey coach. And so I was trying to do these two things simultaneously, but it was really the coaching that was my passion. And the more I coached junior hockey, and the more I spent time coaching, the more I realized is I was going to do everything I could to be a professional hockey coach someday. And I got to a point in my life where it just didn't make sense to keep on that track anymore.
Right.
And so when I got out of that, just through pure circumstance, I ended up meeting a group from Calgary that had a company called Results, and they were expanding into Edmonton when I was in a career transition point. And they took a chance on me and hired me as their first Edmonton employee, and my job was to grow this market. So I never intended to be in the consulting business, but I found myself there, and it was my combination of coaching through sport and sales, marketing, and business development that made me an attractive acquisition target, I suppose, to help grow the company locally.
That's such an interesting story, and it sounds like for a lot of people that I've spoken to, business consulting is one of those careers that you sort of fall in love with, but you don't necessarily, like, I don't know if you know very many people like 18 or 20, like, I want to be a consultant, right? Yeah. But when you sort of learn about what that is, it's really interesting and appealing. I have to ask, so you went into marketing and then you started your shuttle business. What gave you the idea to start that business?
Well, that was actually an idea that I originally did when I was in grade 9.
You were shuttling people in grade 9.
Well, yeah. So
Awesome.
it's kind of a weird thing. So I went to my first Edmonton Elks game, and they had a different name back then. But we were gifted tickets to a preseason game against the Calgary Stampeders, and this would have been the spring of, I guess it would have been 1987. And I remember the day like just as clear as it was yesterday. Just this bright, sunny day, and I'd never been to Commonwealth Stadium before, and we had these amazing seats in the lower bowl, like right on the 55-yard line. You couldn't have asked for better seats, and I was so enamored with the spectacle of the whole thing, because I had been to Oilers games, but I'd never been in a stadium with 50,000 people in it.
Wow. And
partway through the game, I think it was early in the third quarter, the Calgary Stampeders were punting the ball away, and this guy wearing a number 2 jersey that was like, no more than 5'5" or 5'6", I think, but just built like a brick, you know what? He caught this ball like on the 5-yard line and started running up the field into just a frenzy of tacklers. And all of a sudden, you think the play is going to get blown dead. And the crowd erupts, and Henry Gizmo Williams emerges from this crowd of Stampeders and scampers down the left sideline, crosses the goal line, and does his heralded flip. And that was the most excited I had ever been, I think, to that point in my entire life. And so I was hooked on football. So from that moment on, my dad took me to pretty much every game that the Elks played. And it got to the point where my enthusiasm for the game was spilling over into my close circle of friends.
Right.
And so back before seatbelts were law, we would pack 10 or 11 people into my dad's van. He would drive us to games, and we're literally like, we're sitting on the floor on each other's knees on the cooler and in the sink of this van. And for some reason on the way back one day, I said to my dad, like, we got 14 or 15 people that are consistently coming to these games. Why couldn't it be 100? And my dad owned a trucking company at the time, and he had a contact with a guy that owned school buses, Randy Fluker. And he said, well, if you can fill the spots, I know a guy that's got a bus. And so
You're kidding.
I started printing posters in our basement on the old dot matrix printers
before social media.
Ads,
the posters.
Using what was it, clip art to make these posters, and
I remember clip art,
plastering them around the school hallways. I would go into classrooms and pitch the teachers would let me pitch this idea to their entire class.
Yeah.
And I literally was taking my piggy bank money down to Safeway and buying Safeway family huddle tickets for $6 or $5, whatever they were at the time, and just repackaging them. And so that fall of 1991, we took a bunch of kids, or 1990, I guess it would. We took a bunch of kids to games, and then that was the last time I ever did it. And so that idea came back into my head in 1998 when I was in university, and I was trying to figure out a way to supplement my daily income to avoid getting a student loan.
Right.
So I was trying to think of like, what other kind of jobs could I get? Part-time jobs, maybe bartending, bussing tables. But what else could I do that I could be relatively in control of that would supplement the day job I had, which was driving a forklift in a scrapyard. And I thought, what if I did this football thing again? I wonder if I could do it on a bigger scale and make a reasonable amount of money that would offset my tuition. So I worked out a deal with Grant Nesbitt that owned the Boston Pizza in Fort Saskatchewan. I said, hey, you buy the tickets, I'll fill your bar before and after games. And so he agreed to do it. And that's what I did for that season of 1998 as a third-year university student. So where it got interesting, though, is when I was going to do it again in the summer of '99, I went into the Edmonton Elks sales offices and met with their sales manager, Daryl Zielinski, to try to work out some kind of a discounted ticket package. And he said, I've got a better idea. In 1998, you outsold our entire group sales department.
No way.
Why don't you just come work for us? And I was just in my glory, right? And working with Hugh Campbell closely and a whole bunch of other great folks that were there. Don Matthews was coaching the team at the time. But that's kind of how I got my start in sales without even trying to or without realizing what I was kind of on a path or what my trajectory was.
That's such a unique perspective for someone that's in school, right? Because, what you generally hear about is people that are working hard to fund their education. They have one or two jobs on the side, but you weren't looking for, you had the hourly wage at the scrapyard, but you're spotting these opportunities. Were you just born like that? Or what had you become that way? How were you trained to see these hey dad, can we fill this bus?
Yeah.
That's not a common thought, train of thought there.
Yeah. So I think it's a fascinating topic to dive into, and maybe there is a little bit of hardwiring that we have, but I tend to think it's more about the environment. I think it's more nature over nurture, quite honestly, Francisco, more nurture over nature. And I think I grew up in an era where kids generally had a lot more freedom, flexibility, and autonomy. Like for summer holidays, your parents would kick you out of the house and say, don't come back till supper. And wherever you went and whatever you did was kind of you're left to your own devices. But I'm really lucky that my parents didn't put limits on me. My parents never said, no, that's dumb, that's silly, we don't have time for that. And I don't know how they made time for it, but I really grew up in an environment much like the rules of improv, where you have to build on each other's ideas and you're not allowed to say no. My parents seemed to always find a way to say yes, and they enabled me to do things. And I think cumulatively, if you're allowed to experiment and follow your imagination, the more you do that, the bigger your ideas become. And so I was allowed and supported by my folks to do a lot of those things. And so I was, for whatever reason, I was always the person that was convincing my friends to leave the couch and come play road hockey. I was always the person that was influencing groups of people to come and do things. But it was always out of passion and enthusiasm. When I get excited about something, I just want other people to come along. I want other people to experience that joy. And I think that was the light bulb that went on for me that got me really passionate about sales. Was if you do a great job at sales, you're literally bringing joy to people's lives every single day, because you're enabling things that wouldn't have been possible had they not met you.
I have to ask, were you good at school when you were in that period of your life?
I was exceptional at school up until high school. Yeah. I was an honor student. In junior high, I was the kid one of the kids that was getting exempt from final exams. So while a lot of my friends were writing those final exams and stressing over the studying of those, I was on the golf course. My marks, but it took a turn in high school. I wasn't a good student in high school. It wasn't because I was partying. I think for some reason I kind of lost my identity in high school and in early years of university. In fact, I actually got kicked out of university for bad marks. I got a dean's vacation halfway
from
through.
the honor roll.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. So I fell pretty far scholastically, and then I got my act together once I came back to university and finished things up. My marks were quite good again, but yeah, I didn't do well in school in the last high school and the first couple of years of university.
Fair enough. So then you entered the workforce kind of in a unique way, and then you did some sales. how exactly did your coaching on the hockey teams lead you into now business coaching, where you're, still working with people that have their own, personal issues, but it's in a very different arena. So how did you go from that to business consulting?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that got me the job in consulting was my sales and marketing experience. And so our model is a little bit unique, where I have to do consulting as part of our sales process, but I'm not actually doing the coaching and the consulting on an ongoing basis once we bring a client on. So my job is really a lot of the frontward facing marketing, public speaking, doing a podcast, organizing events, doing all of a lot of the upfront discovery that we do with clients. That's kind of my role. Now, the thing about our sales process is it's so immersive and so consultative that it is, I call it like a form of consulting light. But the sales got me the job. But I think the thing that has kept me with it was my passion for coaching. And I think, like Francisco, one of the things that I realized pretty early on in the startup of this Edmonton business was what I loved about coaching hockey. In retrospect, it wasn't the hockey.
Mm-hmm.
It was the chance to be a catalyst for high-performing individuals to come to an understanding if they put the team first, we would all achieve more. And that's the role that we play for executive teams. So as much as I have lots of experience in sales, the thing that drives me is I know that if we can bring a leadership team into our ecosystem, we're going to help them achieve more together. And running their business, it not only becomes simpler and easier, but it becomes so much more fulfilling and rewarding, not just for the executive team, but for all the employees that work underneath them.
Wow. So looking at what Results is today, so you had a workshop recently on communications across the different departments of the company, and that was an incredible workshop. And it was so interesting, like very inspiring being in your office and seeing what the team has grown to. When you launched that Edmonton location, so you have this brand, sounds like they were established in Calgary. What was it like going into this brand new market? Where did you have clients signed up, or did you really have to start from zero?
We were almost starting from zero. So we had 2 clients, and when they were interviewing me, of course, the founders were pulling out all of these, like the database of folks that had come to marketing events, and so I was sort of under the impression there were a whole bunch of people like kind of chomping at the bit to sign up. We just didn't have a salesperson here, and once we got the salesperson, so
they sold you.
It wasn't a bait and switch. There was, I think they were posturing maybe a little bit, and so once I started, I realized that we got a big mountain to climb here, and I've never been through anything like it, because I've always worked in established organizations, right, where my role was important, but the reputation was out there. There were tons of customers to sell into already and to get referrals from. This was a completely different animal where nobody really knew who we were, and there's nobody quite like us. And so it was hard for them to relate to what we even did. It wasn't like I was joining like a startup insurance company or something,
right,
where everybody has a commercial insurance provider. You're just trying to convince them to do business with you instead.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, but for some reason in that struggle, I remember thinking to myself, like, we have 2 customers. I don't know where the third and the fourth one is going to come from, but I'm really excited to try.
Yeah.
And so I remember sitting in my chair at my desk at the time, and imagining the future, and just really being excited about trying to create something incredible and create community. And then confronting the sobering reality is like, I have no clue how we're going to get there.
You just know you're going to somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those first couple of years in business, when you're starting out, what was that like? Did you find it pretty easy to get your first few clients? Or I would love to hear specifically about the first 6 months.
Well, I found it very difficult, and
right.
and then I was used to working in environments where there was frequent transactions,
right?
And that's kind of how you judge your worth as a salesperson. Are you actually closing any deals? And so in the first 6 months I was here, I brought on 1 customer. In the first 12 months I was here, I think I brought on 3 or 4. So I had to recalibrate what progress meant,
right,
and what it looked like. And I had to find sort of small wins on the way to bigger wins to, I think, not only make myself feel okay, but also to demonstrate to the partners that I was a person worth hanging on to.
Right.
Because I think they had expectations of that the client growth was going to be accelerated compared to what was actually happening. So basically, for me, it was always about just trying to spend time with anybody and anyone that would have a coffee with me. And the more people I met with, and I started with my close circle, so people that I knew already.
Yeah.
And it ended up like the first 2 customers that we brought on, they were already close personal friends and happened to own businesses. Alberta Traffic Supply and with Lane Hooper and Original Joe's Restaurant Group with Tim Gordon. So so they were the first companies. 2 folks. So I owe them a huge debt of gratitude because they took a flyer on us when we literally had hardly any clients. But there's a weird thing about Edmonton. Like I love the title of your podcast, Winning in Edmonton, because I think this is one of the best places in the world to start something. Because I think if you have something that's valuable and useful, this community will lift you up and open doors for you beyond your wildest expectations. And I started finding that as we started to gain a little bit of momentum, as the work that we do was working with the small core group of clients, I was constantly getting introduced to other people, invited into conversations, into rooms, into events that were filled with other business owners. And I think what I've learned through this experience, in hindsight, things seem quick and easier, but when you're in the middle of it, boy, does it seem slow. But it's incredible. Like if you do the right things week in and week out for a long time, the cumulative impact of our efforts can be absolutely transformational in the long run.
I've been absolutely blown away with how supportive the established business people have been to newcomers and new business people. Like it feels like there's big city potential, but it's almost like small town kind of levels of support where you are running into the same people. And like if you're going to like the right networking events and things like that, you really are running into the same people over and over. And it seems like it does almost feel like a small town where everyone knows everyone. And I wonder if that's part of why, in Edmonton, like reputation is really important. And I've just been amazed, like even people like yourself taking the time to do this. And just other senior members in the business community. I've been amazed with the level of support.
Yeah.
It's been inspiring.
Yeah. That's really good to hear. And I think that part of our job in life is to build a community of people that cheer for us and root for us. And the only way to do that is to stand by your word, follow through on your commitments, and be useful. And if people could just focus on being useful more of the time, being generous, expressing gratitude. Like I think if a person is genuinely grateful every single time somebody helps them with something, that's the compound interest of our careers. I think gratitude and building relationships that way. And I've been so fortunate that so many phenomenal people have gone out of their way to do kind things for me. And it's incumbent upon me to pay that forward whenever I can, and never miss an opportunity when something good happens to you to stop and pause and just remember that nothing good happens from your own doing. It's always a collection of efforts from a whole bunch of people, and to stop and to recognize people that have made success possible, that just helps it snowball and repeat for you.
Speaking of those amazing people, whether you're starting a new business or launching your business in a new city where it's not previously, it's not always obvious how you should be spending your time, because you don't have someone, in the office next to you being like, okay, hey, you haven't hit your KPIs or whatever. It's not clear exactly how you should be spending your time. In those first couple of years, did you have a mentor? Did you have someone guiding you and instructing you, showing you what you needed to do?
Yeah. So one of the good fortunes about what we do is we have such a strong team of people that have built their own businesses, have been senior leaders in mid-sized organizations. So I was surrounded by phenomenal people right from day one. And one of the advantages that I had, Francisco, is that none of the people I worked with lived in Edmonton. So when they would come up when they would come up here from Calgary, they didn't have to go home to their spouses. They didn't have to go to their kids' sporting events, so they were just here. So they were going to have to go out and eat dinner anyway. And I just soaked up every minute of their time that I could, and always brought, pages and pages of questions and made notes. And that's kind of how I learned that way. And the thing I had going for me when I started this role, though, is I knew a lot about sales. I knew a lot about relationship development. But what I didn't know was kind of what we did and how we did it. So I really had to get caught up to speed on what does running a good business look like? What does good leadership actually look like, right? But I didn't need a lot of help on the sales side. So I was able to follow a lot of things I'd done before that were able to sort of open doors for me in that regard. But I really had to get caught up on business acumen.
Right. So when you were building your business and when you're looking for clients, what kind of organizations can benefit from what you do? Like, when does someone need this kind of consulting or an executive coach?
Yeah. So my answer to that is most people can benefit from it. And the reason I say that is simply about untapped potential. And I think we can all agree that every single person, team, and organization has lots of untapped potential. But I think what it comes down to is, what's the willingness for you to want to do something about it? Because if you're somebody that cares about tapping into your untapped potential, that means you're going to have to confront blind spots. It means you're going to have to confront bad habits. It means you're going to have to be uncomfortable. It means you're going to have to change, right? We don't learn and grow without discomfort. And complacency, while it's comfortable and it's easy, eventually it catches up to us. So really, I'm of the belief that everybody should have somebody that's looking out for their best interest, that is not as tied to their day-to-day world as they are, because that way you have someone that's not afraid to tell you the truth. And that's really about what great coaching and great consulting is. It's people that are competent, that have been where you want to go, and they're not afraid to tell you the truth. They're not afraid to be fired, is kind of how we put it with our team. And then specifically for us, we really work in the mid-market. So we're working with companies generally that have got 50 to 500 employees. And then the mindset thing is really critical, though. So we want to work with folks that are both ambitious and humble. And it's not always that you find ambitious people that are also clearly filled with humility.
Right. So when it comes to the benefits of coaching, I think you make a very compelling case. And, I'm nowhere near the 50 to 200 employee range, but I have worked with quite a few different coaches, and one specifically, her name is Linda Mall.
She's great.
She's brilliant. And I initially reached out to her because starting this new company, I had a little bit of, I don't know if you call it a limiting belief, where it was like, hey, I'm trying to sell to CEOs and executives and I'm 28. Are they going to take me seriously? And she's someone that, having her perspective, because she was a headhunter before she had, she was very successful. And I think having her perspective and kind of helping me through that, just hearing it from someone else instead of just reassuring myself, it doesn't matter. Hearing someone else who, like you said, has been there and done that, it really helped me kind of come to terms with that, and just sort of taking it out of the emotional charge and just keeping it practical, where it's hey, just prep a little bit before each meeting so that you actually know what you're talking about, and you're not just, winging it on the spot, trying to sound smart in front of people that do know what they're talking about. So I definitely understand the benefits, and I think that people should absolutely leverage that. One of the questions that I had for you is, how do you pick the right executive coach for you?
Yeah.
How do you approach that?
Yeah. So I think there's lots of different variables that can go into that. And I think for me, I am kind of focused on two criteria. So criteria number one, have they achieved something that I aspire to? And because I think it can be hard to materially learn from people if they haven't done what you want to do. It doesn't have to be in your field, but I think they have to have demonstrated they've gone where you want to go. Okay. And then the second piece is the personality fit. So you have to like the person. There's a certain level of admiration and likability that you have to work with somebody. And if you don't intuitively, if you just don't jive with that person, if you don't feel comfortable with them for whatever reason, if you don't feel like they're fully invested in your success and it's just another engagement, I don't think that works very well. So I think it's the personality piece and the experience thing. Those are the two big criteria that I would look at.
So, having worked with so many different organizations throughout your career, what do you think are some of the most common challenges that you're seeing present day that the leadership teams are making when it comes to leading their teams and communicating with them?
Yeah. So, I mean, the big challenge right now that we're seeing in the market is succession planning. But beyond that, right now, one of the biggest challenges with communication is the illusion that it's taken place at all. And so communication in most organizations is not very clear, it's not very concise, and it's not very consistent. And if you don't have those three things in place, it is very difficult to communicate well. Another thing that's kind of lacking is there isn't a lot of curiosity that's exhibited at work. And most of the things that ail us, Francisco, are not intentional. They're not malicious. They're just naturally occurring because of the way the world is conspiring against us. And we're finding right now that people are just so busy trying to get work done. There's lots of opportunities. There's lots of, I think, generally there's lots of excitement. And I know right now with the U.S. and Canadian trade relations, there's tension, and there with tension and uncertainty does come a certain level of fear. But generally speaking, I think people are fairly optimistic about how things are looking for them right now. But they're dealing with a shortage of people. They're dealing with a shortage of capable people. Lots of folks have exited the workplace in the last 5 years as a result of COVID. So many early exits and retirements. So people are dealing with more. And when people are busy and they're overwhelmed, we don't generally spend time in those non-urgent, important quadrants, right? And the things that exist in the important, non-urgent quadrant are things like strategy, are things like vision, are things like relationship building and connection and psychological safety and frank, consistent communication, difficult conversations with people that get us on the same page. All of those things take a back seat. And as those things get deferred and delayed and sort of kicked down the road, those problems fester and they get worse, right? And so I think we're just seeing a real gap in the level of communication and the frankness of it. And then as a result here too, what we're seeing, leadership teams have a lot of incongruence and misalignment. And the incongruence piece, there's a big gap right now between what leaders are telling their people and what their behaviors are demonstrating. And it's our behaviors that set the standard for an organization, not our words. And unintentionally, senior leaders are saying things like, we want to have high expectations. We want our core values to matter. And we want to have a culture of accountability. But if you're saying those things, but you're still tolerating poor behavior, if you're still tolerating mediocre performance, as you tolerate those things, you become somewhat of an incongruent leader unintentionally, and credibility suffers because of it.
So many interesting points there. The first one that you brought up was succession planning. And that's one that I'd love to talk about for a moment, because I think that's such a big opportunity that there isn't enough excitement around it, especially in the younger generation. But I don't think the dots have quite been connected as to what exactly that means. So being a headhunter myself, that's something that I'm very familiar with, because sometimes it's very simple where, hey, our VP of finance is retiring, we need someone to backfill that role. But from your perspective, like, how do you approach those kind of conversations, and what sort of opportunity do you see for up and coming young professionals that are ambitious, they are career driven?
Yeah, well, so I think the opportunity is as good as it has ever been for young professionals that are motivated and driven. And the reason for it is there's not enough people to take over businesses from the aging workforce, right? So we're dealing with an aging population that I think right now is worried about the future health of their livelihood. How are they going to get out of their businesses sustainably? Who's going to buy it? Who's going to take it over, right? Who's going to carry on the legacy? And so if there are people, younger generation, that want those kinds of opportunities, they're ample and abundant. But I think there's a couple things that are happening right now. I'm not convinced that there's as many folks from younger generations that want those kinds of opportunities, that necessarily want the responsibility. COVID has had an impact on that, I think, where people question their purpose in life. and wanting more balance, wanting more work from home, wanting more flexibility. So I'm not sure if employment and career opportunities are people's number one thing as much as they used to be, right? And I think sometimes we have to go through another generation and we have to cycle through that for it to come back.
Right.
But I also don't think that senior leaders are spending enough time grooming the next level and getting them excited about what those opportunities are. So I'm not usually much of a believer in, well, I guess the younger generation just doesn't want the opportunities. And
Yeah.
I don't want to be naive and be blind and turn a blind eye to real macro things that are actually taking place in societal shifts. But at the same time, I just find still, no matter how old a person is, if somebody takes time to invest in your development, in your growth, they spend a bit more time to paint a picture of what could be, there are still there's an abundance of people that are excited about those opportunities. I just think we got to do a better job closing those gaps as the older generation.
Why do you think that some of the people that are so established and so ingrained struggle to ease the reins and pass off some of the work to, the up and comers? Like what do you find from your side? Like, what are you seeing that is such a big challenge on that end? And not everyone, of course, but like there's some situations that are like that.
Yeah, well, I think the convenient narrative is that we're either too busy to hand things over and it's just easier to get it done ourselves, or maybe we don't have faith and confidence in the person that I'm going to delegate this to. So I think those are the convenient answers, and I might even call them excuses. I think the deeper underlying reasons for it and the undertones is, if you're going to start to work yourself out of a job, whether you're conscious of it or not, there's an identity crisis that pops up, because you now have to figure out, where is my worth? Where is my value? Right? When I get up every morning, if I do a great job at building the next level of leadership that can take on these big responsibilities that normally I was the only one that had the answers for, I don't know how to function in that world. And so I think there's a lot of convenient reasons for us to tell ourselves why we don't do those things, why we don't grow the next level, why we don't hand over the reins. But I think we have to reckon to what does next look like. What's the identity shift? Where do we get our new purpose from? And I think that's why it's so important we don't tie our identities to what we do. We tie our identities more to who we are.
Right.
Because if we tie them more to who we are, we can take our character and our values anywhere we go. We can take our core values and our beliefs into any role. And it's so much easier to do that if we're focused more on who we want to be instead of what we want to do.
And that's such a difficult dynamic for some people to navigate. And one of the things that I found this year was that you can't, if you fail to do succession planning, sometimes life will do it for you because someone gets sick. And now, instead of having 2 years to groom the next CFO or CEO, you're now calling a headhunter to try to do a search and try to get someone in there because someone, had a medical emergency or a family issue or something like that. So it's really tricky. Another thing that you touched on was, you said through a lot of organizations, communication isn't happening, but they think it is. Could you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah. So here's the best way that I think I could summarize it, is that we know ourselves through our thoughts. Everybody else knows us through our behavior and our actions. And so for a senior leader, you eat, sleep, and breathe your vision, your strategy, your expectations, your goals, your challenges and problems, your anxieties, your wins, and your celebrations. But we don't always recognize that we're not sharing those things as overtly, as openly, and as consistently as it might seem, because we never stop thinking about them.
Right.
But for the average employee, there's the phrase that we have to hear things 7 times in 7 different ways for it to start to resonate. So I just think we generally do a poor job of understanding how often we have to communicate the same messages. And we see that show up in professional sports. The best head coaches, they do such a good job at distilling from all of the noise of the world the simple key ingredients and repeat those messages over and over and over, so their team has very little ambiguity as to what is expected of them and where they're going.
One of the things I kind of wanted to pick your brain on was you touched briefly as well regarding authenticity. And in terms of the communication, one of the challenges that I sort of felt in the corporate world was sometimes there would be meetings or very lengthy conversations where there's a lot of talking, but not a lot is being said. And sometimes a lot of the words kind of revolve around what I call corporate jargon, like sort of the buzzwords, but really no one is, saying what they think should happen bluntly. And that really frustrated me. Do you find, I guess, like, what do you find is an antidote to that? Because I feel like sometimes when you, and this is purely from an outsider, even just talking to hiring managers and executives, like when you have a conversation with someone over a lunch or over a coffee, it's very easy for them to be authentic and say what they really think. But once you put them in front of a team, it's like a totally different person.
Yeah.
What do you think about, like, do you think that authenticity and like almost fear of being authentic with your team contributes to this
huge
lack of communication?
I'd like to turn it around on you.
Sure.
Though. What do you think is at play there?
I think people have two personalities. I think they have their personal at home, like who they are. And then I think when they put on, especially in the professional realm, I think they're a totally different person. And I was guilty of that too. And I remember I had to, like, one of my mentors growing up kind of rightfully shamed me for that. He just said, "You're way cooler outside of work." I don't like, it made me like, oh, like it actually, like it just kind of, it actually did sting a little bit, because like the second he said is like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. And I think it was just when you become in a professional setting, I've always believed that, hey, to be professional, to be taken seriously, you have to like sound professional. You have to always be polished. You have to always say the right thing. You have to have the answer to everything. And I think it's been really eye-opening meeting, really successful business owners where they sort of aren't worried about that. They're just sort of, just they're at ease. They're saying what they want to say in a respectful way, of course. But there's a certain level of authenticity that I've struggled with before, and I'm, trying really hard to work on and trying to be very cognizant of. But I think it's a fear of being yourself at work.
Yeah.
I think it's a fear.
And what do you think is behind the fear of being yourself at work? Like what are people afraid of?
I can only speak for myself, but I think it was the fear of failure, or the fear of being judged in this one very specific environment.
Yeah. Like
everyone here is so put together, or even, in certain meetings where, earlier in my career, it's like, hey, this person is so much further along the road. I have to be very, I have to be perfect in this meeting. Otherwise they're not going to want to do business with me, right? Like this person's a VP and I'm an account manager. I have to say the right thing. I have to like be sharp. And I think it was just maybe, I don't know. Do you think professional self-esteem is a thing, or maybe just general self-esteem?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think all of those things are at play for sure. And I think another thing is in community, we value belonging, safety, and security over anything else. One of our greatest fears as people is to be jettisoned from a group, or to be ostracized from our community. There's even, I can't remember who did the study, but there is some pretty compelling evidence that we'll go against our own core values to uphold the norms of a group just so we can remain part of it.
Right.
And especially when we're young in our careers, that if we are too authentic, we risk the chance of being different, but different not in a way that will be celebrated, different in a way that will eliminate us from opportunities, that will erode relationships or block them altogether, be the black sheep, and maybe even lose our job, which is kind of the ultimate loss of safety and security when it comes to career and financial security and advancement. And this is one of the things that drives me and we do, Francisco, is the power dynamic that exists in all structures is a critical element to this. And I just think if you are a person that owns a business that is in a position of influence and power, you literally have it within you to create vulnerable, authentic, genuine teams, and to make it safer for younger people and or folks that come from different ethnic backgrounds or experiences to be more themselves. Because we also know through countless pieces of data and research that if you have to be too different at work than from your natural style, that's an exhausting way to live. And
you're wearing a mask all day.
You're wearing a mask all day. That's a great way to put it. And you go home at the end of the day, you're exhausted. It's just no way to live, right? And we just have a belief that work should be fulfilling for everybody, and that is the job of leadership. That's why leadership is so tough. And just because you own a business or you're in charge of a team of people doesn't make you a leader. Anybody can be a leader, but I just think it's such an important piece to create those environments so that we don't have to feel as young people so much that we're imposters, because there's enough things to scare us in the world. There's enough things that are going to generate imposter syndrome without having to keep up appearances around the people that we rely on the most.
In terms of that imposter syndrome, that's so common. Like that comes up so often now. And I think in terms of, you brought up that security, like risk of losing your job. Like, in the sales world, a lot of it's like risk of losing a client. This company is never going to want to work. All of my coworkers are going to hate me. It's going to be so embarrassing. I think, Jeff, without even realizing it, part of the reason I wanted to start my own company, I used to say it was like, well, I want to control, like I want to have more influence over the culture. I think it actually does come down to the authenticity, where like I want people to have the permission, not only permission to be themselves, I insist. It kind of frustrates. I think people are intuitive. People know deep down, hey, this person's being genuine with me, or like this person is just throwing fluff at me and they're, hi, I'm Billy from Jimmy's recruitment, or like people know like, hey, this person's keeping it real with me, or like this person isn't. So I think when I like reflect on it, I think that was one of the things that I was really craving. And I'm excited about that. Like as the team grows, that's something like, hey, maybe when we grow, I'll be calling your company to help us, nurture that. In terms of authenticity, one question I wanted to ask you, well, actually, do you know who Jocko Willink is?
So
Jocko?
So that name is familiar, but I can't place it specifically. So tell me.
So he is like a leadership coach. He used to be a ex-Navy SEAL. He wrote a book called Extreme Ownership. I love his podcast. I've listened to hours of good old Jocko. And one of the things that he talks about is he's a big advocate of the indirect approach when you're having difficult conversations in leadership. So I wanted to ask you about it because, sometimes, and just me personally, like it would be very authentic to be like, I'm not a monster, I promise, but like very, very direct, like, hey, we agreed to this didn't happen. What the heck? Is everything okay? But people like Jocko talk about how an indirect approach is more effective when you're leading people, especially when it comes to areas where it's more emotionally charged, like performance management and those kind of things. I wanted to ask your opinion on that. Are you an advocate of the direct approach, or do you also advocate for a more indirect approach?
Yeah, so I'm an advocate for being clear with people, right? And there's lots of different ways you can do that. But can you give me a better understanding of what does he mean by indirect approach?
So instead of, oh man, I'm gonna have to like regurgitate 30 hours worth of podcasts here. But basically, so one of the military stereotypes that people have, and that I had as well, is like, you are just sort of told top down, hey, these are the expectations. And if you don't accomplish this, push-ups and pull-ups. And that's it. It's black and white. And he was basically, his core message is that isn't the best way to lead. That the best way to lead is to have the people that you're leading, they themselves come up with the plan and basically empower them to hold themselves accountable to the results that they themselves commit to, as opposed to a top-down, these are the expectations. If you don't do this, some kind of punishment. Did I explain it all right
Yeah,
there?
no, I think that's, I think that's good. And so I think it's probably, I mean, very different in the military, right? And I've never spent time in the military, so I couldn't even begin to comment on what that environment is like.
Fair enough.
And what works and what doesn't. So I appreciate Jocko's perspective, but I think in the workplace it's a combination of those things, right? I mean, I think the best leaders are clear about what the standards and expectations are, but they do it in such a way where they're bringing people into the conversation and getting them excited about the possibilities. It's accountability shouldn't be a dirty word. It shouldn't be a punitive exercise. Dan Pink is one of my favorite thought leaders, and one of his many books, this is probably one of my top 5 business books, is a book called Drive. And what Drive is all about is Dan Pink studied all kinds of environments from scholastic to healthcare to private enterprise to military environments. And he was trying to get a sense of what is it about the environment where sometimes the members of a team are intrinsically motivated. So they're taking ownership of what it is they're trying to accomplish. And they push themselves. They're not being pushed externally.
Right.
And what he found was there were 3 things. So these environments had autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so on the autonomy side, what we've learned now, I think, is that the best managers and the best leaders, they measure what, but not how. And then they provide coaching and guidance and training and mentorship and everything it takes to help people close the skill gap and the capability gap and hopefully the confidence gap to achieve those results, but they don't micromanage how they go about it as long as they're not breaking any laws or any big rules.
Yeah.
The mastery side is if we have a chance to learn and grow and improve in a field that we're curious and interested in, that's a very rewarding environment to be in. And then on the purpose side, when we can draw a strong and clear connection to what we do, making a difference in the world, that is incredibly powerful. And on the purpose side, I sometimes share the story of a young child learning how to play the piano. And when they first start sort of playing piano, they might be interested and curious about it. But at that point, it's really just at the lowest level of satisfaction, which is pleasure. So a kid might play and they get a lot of pleasure from the sounds of the piano. But as they learn to play their favorite Disney songs, that's when a passion can develop, and passion kind of comes through experience and overcoming obstacles and looking back and saying, wow, like I've really done some things here that are interesting and I've struggled, but I've gotten better because of that struggle. So that is often where passion can come from. But then there's a real magical thing that starts to happen between pleasure and true purpose. It's that all of a sudden that child is at a senior's home playing Disney songs and they see the eyes of the audience start to light up. Right. And you might even see seniors start to shed a tear because it reminds them of their own grandkids or their own childhoods. And as soon as that kid sees that their pleasure that turned into passion is now bringing joy to that home of people, that is where purpose is derived. And as soon as we feel a strong sense of purpose and it's connected to the things that we do, that's one of the most powerful things that can happen to a human. That is when you will learn, when you will grow, when you will push yourself, when you overcome obstacles. So I think that's what I believe in terms of the type of environment. So I think it's a hybrid of the direct and indirect.
That's so true. And that makes me think of like when back in the day when I was learning how to play drums, I was trying to learn how to read the tabs and I couldn't do that. But the second it was like, hey, this is the tab for Ozzy Osbourne Crazy Train, it was like,
there you go.
Say no more. I'm locked in now.
You lived it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Francisco, something else comes up here too. Like, have you come across Kim Scott, Radical Candor, that framework?
Oh, that sounds very familiar. I've heard of the expression radical candor.
Yeah, and Kim's got a powerful and simplistic framework for how to give feedback and sort of healthy criticism, I suppose you would call it. And the 2 key components to radical candor is that you're very clear and direct, but that you also care personally. And if you miss either one of those, it doesn't land very well. Like if you're very clear and direct, that sounds more like the military style of direct feedback,
Right.
where there's just no personal care, there's no empathy, there's no attempt at mutual understanding, and you just come across as an a-hole.
Mm-hmm.
But if you veer too far on the other side, if you're not clear, if you're not candid, and you're all on the care personally, that's just ruinous empathy. That's like, oh, don't we all, Francisco, we'll get him next time, or don't worry, it's not so bad. But nobody wins in that regard, because if I'm not clear and direct with you, I'm going to harbor these ill feelings, this miscommunication, or this disappointment I have in how you're performing internally, and it's going to eat away at our relationship until eventually it comes to blows, and you're not going to improve because you're not going to know exactly what I'm seeing and how I'm feeling. But if we can get the care and we can get the candor right, that tends to be a good recipe for a very transparent and trusting relationship with other people.
Wow. So those two elements, and you know what, actually there's so many experiences I can think back of, like when we hire a contract worker or like a temporary worker for a company, and you check in, it's like, hey, how's this person doing on their first 3 months? And you say, oh yeah, like, well, they're okay. We'll see how it goes over the next couple of weeks. But for the most part, they're doing well. It's like, okay, I think they're doing okay. We'll check in, but there's a couple areas. Next phone call I get 3 days later, they're getting fired. It's like, whoa, were they really doing okay, or were they like just in the line, right? So it really is better for everyone to have that level of honesty. And then when you combine it with that care, I'm sure it's just so much more digestible versus like this person's just being a jerk, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that notion of it's more digestible.
Yeah.
The smaller and more frequent things are, the more digestible they are, right? It's just like you eat 7 tiny little snacks during the day versus one big meal.
Yeah.
That's a far different scenario for our digestive system. And I think it's the same thing with expectations and feedback. And one of the things we convince ourselves to avoid confrontation when we first hire somebody is that, it's just a small little data point. It'll get better. We'll see how it evolves. But we keep telling ourselves that. And then by the time we finally have a conversation, things have got dramatically bad and almost irreparable. And the employee is hearing it for the first time. And, you know, and I think for managers and leaders, it's not about being perfect. It's just about being better.
Right.
And just have a commitment to have those conversations more frequently. Set the standard at the onset, and have a really clear check-in and meeting cadence for that person to be clear and caring about how you see them actually doing.
So, Jeff, if someone is listening to this and they're saying, okay, these kind of conversations that they're having with these people is exactly what I want to do. You know, I've always thought about getting into consulting. It's something that I really want to explore. What is the career path for someone that wants to get into that industry? What should they do?
Well, I think it depends on what kind of consulting they want to do, right? And I think for a lot of consulting, having actual experience. So if you want to teach leadership, I think it's important that you've spent time being a leader and a manager of teams, because there can be a big difference between theory and practicality, and not always. Like if you're a person that's low on actual business experience, you can overcome it, but you'd have to be absolutely incredible at facilitation and reading body language and being in front of a group of people. And you would have to have, I think, almost an encyclopedic knowledge of the domain that you're consulting in.
Right.
And there's a lot more forgiveness if you lack a little bit of the theoretical recall, if you've actually been in the role and you understand how teams work and leadership works. And so I think when it comes to being a great consultant, there's not a lot of shortcuts. You got to get the hours. You got to get your hands dirty. You got to roll up your sleeves. And the only way that we usually acquire wisdom is through failure.
Right.
And so I think it's just, you got to make a lot of mistakes. And I think it's easier to be sort of, one of the mistakes that I sometimes see advisors make is it's hard for them to be authentic and genuine if they haven't walked a mile in their client's shoes. If you have walked a mile, it is so much easier to admit that you might not know the answer, because you don't feel like you should be expected to know the answer, because you know what it was like to be in their world.
Right.
So you know that it's hard, right? And you know that there isn't a one size fits all. But sometimes if you're relying too much on theory, not enough on practical experience, there can be, I think, an enhanced fear of not knowing an answer. And you know what it's like. anytime you're around somebody, and we've probably all been there ourselves, when we give an answer that we really didn't have confidence was the right answer, it only makes us look like a fool.
Right. So, Jeff, the name of the podcast is called Winning in Edmonton. I like to ask this question. What is winning for you?
Yeah, winning for me is about seeing other people succeed. So winning for me is about playing a role, opening doors, having conversations, bringing people together. Like, I just love connecting people that have got big aspirations and different experiences that can put it all together. It's one of the reasons that we do so many events, large and small. Any one person doesn't have all the answers, but it's remarkable if you put the right people in the room. There's hardly anything we can't solve together. So I think it's just trying to be at the epicenter, or trying to just be on the peripheral of having a role in bringing people together to achieve greater results than they ever could have on their own.
Amazing, Jeff. And to anyone in the Edmonton area, I can't recommend enough attending one of Results workshops at their office. That was so valuable, and I'll definitely be going to more. So thank you so much for coming on, Jeff. Do you want to just let everyone know where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm most active on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Just search up my name, Jeff Tetz. And then our website is unleashresults.com, and we've got lots of resources there. The podcast is there. Links to the events that we run are all there, and even just the bios of our wonderful team. And always around to have a coffee and talk about leadership and business with anybody out there that wants to spend some time doing those things too.
Amazing. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.